when Lauren first approached me about this topic, I was rather excited about it. This is what I live and do every day. And I get like 5 emails a day about changes that have happened. So I thought this would be pretty easy. I just have to read my email and it'll all work out. But as I went along, I realized this is far broader than I thought it was. And it became somewhat overwhelming to try to figure out how to explain it to y'all in an hour. I created a quick list here of just a few things that have already happened, and this is not even close. Recent repeal of the Clean Power Plan changed the definition of waters in the United States, of course the national monuments, review and potential changes, delay that has since been not delayed in the ozone standards, reopening of the sage-grouse plans, revocation of new flood risk standards and trying to incorporate climate change, reduced EPA enforcement actions compared to the past 3 previous administrations, the on-again, off-again relationship with the Paris Climate Agreement, the approval of the Dakota Access and Keystone XL pipelines, repeals of lead ammunition ban in national wildlife refuges, the creation of a climate change red team to poke holes in climate science and the EPA, reduced role for scientists in the administration, and even the prohibition on discussing climate change within the administration and to some extent just even mentioning it, right? So that's just a brief summary of what's going on. I'm not going to talk about all those things. I decided to both approach this more broadly and a bit more narrowly. But if you do want an overview, there's plenty of places to find that. And this is my favorite, it's this article, a running list of how Trump is changing the environment. National Geographic put together, and actually open the web page here so you can see what it looks like. And this is a, oops, that doesn't show up. We're on 2 screens here. But I do want you to be able to see it. So this is probably the best place to go look.
Still not showing there.
Happens to me every day in class. So it's a running list. It's ordered chronologically. You can walk down through for pages and pages and pages and get a summary of all of the things that are happening. I don't consider the National Geographic to be a particularly partisan organization, personally. So it's a pretty good discussion of all of the various things that are going on. What I'm going to do is focus on a couple of changes, or 3 changes in particular, that I think present a broad array of the things that are going on. So this is our roadmap for the day. As I mentioned, I'm going to go both more broadly and more narrowly. So first, I'm going to talk about why this matters. And this shouldn't be a difficult conversation, but we have a tendency to forget why we do these things. So we'll have a brief discussion of why we care. And then Lauren already mentioned this a bit, but I'm going to talk about how, and it in quotes, how is it happening? How is it that the executive branch can create radical changes in how we manage the natural world? And then I'll conclude with this. What is happening? What are a few specific examples of changes the Trump administration is making? Now, in doing this, I don't intend to either wallow in misery or to claim that everything is awesome. I was at a conference last Friday with the deputy solicitor from this administration, and I would have titled his speech, "Everything is Awesome." But rather, what I care about is understanding the broader context, what's going on, vision for the future, and why it all matters. So these are the 3 examples we'll look at: the Clean Power Plan, the Waters of the United States rule, and then a local example of the sage-grouse plan. So we have a little Idaho connection here. But first, because I am a professor, we're going to have a short quiz. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some photos, and I want you to tell me what the pictures are. The first 2 are pretty easy, and it gets a bit harder from there. So, and you need to shout it out or raise your hand. You know what that is? That's the Cuyahoga River on fire. This is an article from Time Magazine from 1969 about the river, describing them as convenient free sewers and discussing the Cuyahoga in particular. Chocolate brown, oily, bubbling with subsurface gases, it oozes rather than flows. Anyone who falls into the Cuyahoga does not drown, Cleveland citizens joke grimly, he decays. It actually caught on fire multiple times. This is just one example. Polluted so badly that the water would burn. The next one is hopefully even easier than that.
It's a Teton Dam.
That is the Teton Dam in the process of falling apart. So this is 1976. If you're familiar with the story at all, as it was being filled for the first time, water seeped out into the bedrock. It was highly fractured basalt and rhyolite bedrock. Came back in and eroded the dam from the inside. So this is before it was even filled. This, in 1976, this occurred after one of our most important environmental statutes was enacted, the National Environmental Policy Act. But the environmental impact statement for that particular project, dams are pretty significant. They have all sorts of harmful effects. That EIS, environmental impact statement, totaled 18 pages. I worked on one in practice that was 7,000 pages. The section of that EIS titled "The Probable Environmental Impact of the Proposed Project" was 3 pages long. We did not worry too much in '76 about the environmental impacts of things, even though we'd already started to enter the modern era as we were the environmental era. Okay, this one's a little bit harder. Guesses? This is Yellowstone National Park. This is the Island Park Ranger District down in southeast Idaho, and these are clear cuts. So that is the border of the park where no timber harvesting occurred and where clear cuts occurred. This is from 1990. This is that, and you can still see it today. You can still see this. Trees have started to grow. But this is again from an era in which the primary purpose of the forest was timber harvesting. Before the grizzly bear was listed as endangered, for the lynx now listed as threats, before we took into account the environmental impacts of our action. The next two, one might be harder than the other. These two are not obscure. This is not at all obscure. It's just not as recognizable.
You like if you don't parking lot?
No, this is
Love
the,
Canal.
this right here is the infamous Love Canal. Today. And so Love Canal was originally intended to be a canal to bypass Niagara Falls. When railroads started to become useful, it was abandoned and then used as a pit to bury toxic waste. This highway here became a bit of a dam for the toxic waste, and so as it rained, it would fill up. The local school district insisted on buying this facility and building a school. The school was built in here, and then these subdivisions, which are now empty, of course, pierced the cap. As the rain fell, it filled up the canal, and all the toxic waste came out. The horrific pictures of children that were born in this area. The amount of birth defects was astonishing. This was largely the moment that gave rise to what we know as the Superfund law, the CERCLA, in 1980. Similar story, but more obscure at the same time. No one's going to know this one. This is Times Beach, Missouri, just west of St. Louis. This was also a subdivision. The person hired to control dust on the roads, the truck he used to spray waste oil, is what we used back then. He also used the same truck when he hauled waste from a facility that was manufacturing Agent Orange. So this entire subdivision was full of dioxin. Pretty nasty stuff. It's now a state park, but you can see the remnants of the subdivision. So these are all stories from the things that we did before we started enacting environmental regulation. Why do I tell these stories? Well, success breeds amnesia. And we look out today and these things don't happen, and we forget why we did them. Even if we were around at the time that it happened. But what are the people who were around that remembered or were acting at this time? What did they think? So what's part of our history? This is astonishing to me. I don't consider myself to be a very old person, although increasingly I'm getting gray hairs right now. So I was born in 1973. I've always thought of living in an enlightened world. And what we'll see is that almost all well, no longer my boss, but still makes me Don, you made things, oh, there we go, okay. So the dates on these are the things that I find fascinating. So the Clean Air Act, in modern form, the ones that are in italics are statutes that have been enacted previously, but in their present form. Clean Air Act in 1970 amended in 77 and 1990. That 1990 amendment to the Clean Air Act was the last time we enacted any significant environmental legislation. The National Environmental Policy Act, January 1st, 1970. Clean Water Act, the way it exists today in 1972. The Endangered Species Act in 1973. Now I enter acronym world. NIFMA is the National Forest Management Act, and FLPMA is the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. Forests and the rest of the public lands respectively. Enacted in 1976. These were actually the first regimes we enacted that really regulated the public lands. We had activities on the public lands for centuries. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, this deals with solid hazardous waste, 1976, and then CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, enacted largely in response to Times Beach and Love Canal, not until 1980. So this is all pretty new. What did the people doing this then think? Right? So we have to, this is really hard to imagine.